Hello. Hope everyone's having a great time at droidcon. I know I am, although being back in California reminds me that I'm allergic to the pollen, so the state is trying to kill me. But anyway, let's try and talk about something that I absolutely love to geek out about, which is social engineering and tech migrations. Have you ever gotten frustrated trying to convince your team to adapt or innovate or take on something new? Maybe you wanted a design system, or you wanted to try out Compose, or you wanted to finish that giant migration from Java to Kotlin, but either you don't know where to start, or it's kind of stagnated, and you're not having real traction with the project. Do you have a lot of last mile problems? Okay. A lot of you are here on your personal journeys as engineering contributors who are building up into the tech leaders of either today or tomorrow. So what I'm wanting to do up here is to kind of talk you through how you build that influence. At Reddit on Platform, I currently have 7 staff principal engineering reports, and they're always full of ideas and constantly supporting and evangelizing other engineers' ideas as well. So we're always doing something. We have something kind of like percolating, we have something well underway, we have something finishing. And their goals always are making Android development easier for the feature teams to build awesome stuff and to deliver value straight to Reddit users. So I bet you all have ideas that you're trying to pitch, and you have approaches that have worked or not worked. But you're always trying to think about how you get your project to the top of the list. So we're going to talk about some of the techniques to approach these projects. And we want to make room for new technologies and sunset the old stuff. We'll cover minimum viable migration approaches and how you adopt maybe some more agile thinking, even for platform projects. So if you've ever also landed a migration only to find out that nobody understands why it was a good idea, maybe work on developing the business value side of the value prop a little bit more. So we'll talk about how to do that better next time. So, almost every conversation that happens in an engineering team revolves around some sort of change. That's what innovation is. You have things that you want to change and to improve, like stability or performance, costs, maintainability. There are things you don't want to change and you don't want to disrupt, like users' good experiences or important business metrics. It's important to remember that change is usually somewhat destructive because it's a transformational process. And it's not really meant to be easy. So there's pretty much no migration that comes for free. It usually requires resourcing, time, attention from your business, and you're going to have skin in the game for anything that's actually truly important. So in the right conditions and with the right sort of team, these risks can actually be challenges that your team runs toward as opposed to avoids. And some of our biggest wins, like the changes to builds that Eric was talking about yesterday, required us to take some calculated risks around disruption in hopes of getting major improvements out of it. So instead of chipping away at big problems with fairly easy tasks, we had a 2.5-hour build time problem that we needed to solve with something that was a big step forward. So when you're pitching changes, you want to be setting yourself up for success and setting your business up for success. And the chances are, if the project was straightforward, somebody would already have done it. So we need to talk a little bit about breaking down those projects in different ways and why it helps to take the non-trivial stuff and make it more trivial. It never ceases to surprise me how much waterfall work we still have around, even on product teams. So while there are merits to both waterfall and agile approaches, I want to give you some of the reasons why I'm always default agile, and I will fall back on waterfall only when it makes sense. So let's take a moment in this one. I'm going to rant a little bit about iterative development versus waterfall here. I think it impacts your personal projects. There's an idea in our industry that a project can be spun as sort of a staff or principal engineering making project. These giant projects are meant to like prove a person. I have a lot to say about this. I don't think it's a good pattern. I think that any business critical project that comes up should be tied not to somebody's promo, but to delivering the best projects as a team. I think doing the like staff type project encourages heroing, and project feedback becomes personal feedback, and that can really bork up the project. It also makes it really hard to do big, important things when you feel like maybe you can't ask for more resources or help with a tricky problem, and you're only feeling like you're gonna have like a rubber duck. So this all stacks risk on the project and the person. So there's a lot of stress on both. I want to take you through an example of how you can sequence things a little bit differently, but there are some downsides to this too. Let's call the blue a hungry product stakeholder project, and the pink some tech debt or a migration or an engineering-led project that has hungry engineering stakeholders. Your team needs to satisfy both, and you need to sequence this work. So the features of waterfall here is it's super easy to explain. You're gonna do one project to completion first, and then you're gonna do the other project to completion. It's a simple priority queue in terms of you take turns. Often these are not equal turns, and projects are ground on until they're done. And then there's like a big parade and everybody is like having cake. If a milestone is missed, all subsequent work is delayed. Misses and failures are big misses for anyone who's on that project. So everything gets delivered that is initially asked for, or it's getting like chucked out and discarded along the way just to make the deadlines still work. But you still have other stakeholders who are hungry, and they're in a holding pattern waiting for their project to start. So one of the values, like the value is less incrementally delivered. It shows up for users slower. And the closer you get to the end, to the star, the more risk is built up. And you've also got a lot of your unsatisfied stakeholders, the hungry ones, waiting for the next project, sitting there waiting at the exact same time that you're in the most vulnerable place. Maybe some of you have already had projects like this. If you get any big ones, you almost certainly will. So let's talk about some other ways that you can break this stuff down. I know this slide is crazy. Before your eyes cross, just know that there are tons of tools out there that will just help you sequence as long as you break down your projects into incremental parts. The little squares are just sprints, like sprints where you focus on one thing or another. So a lot of people just stop at Agile with like, oh, we'll just go back and forth and do smaller bits of stuff. You might do 3 on the same project and get something done, and then 3 on another. But if you just took the top waterfall approach and broke it down on the 2 projects, you still don't really get much done until the end, but now you've actually deferred. And that's where a lot of people stop with Agile. They're like, oh, actually I get stuff later because we're just chipping away at multiple projects at the same time. But actually in practice, this is not what happens. So one of the really great things about Agile is that after every one of your little blocks, you get to stop and ask a few questions. You get to ask, was this good enough? Is this enough? Do I have a minimum viable answer to this problem? And it turns out a lot of time you do. So if you have the top sort of pattern, you have a hungry stakeholder who has been waiting a really long time, and they give you a big, long wish list of all that they want, including a lot of things that turn out to be maybe not requirements, but like nice to haves, want to haves, things that have not been validated by your users or your problem as actually being necessary. But they think they're never gonna get another chance, so they give everything to you. But when you break these things down, you actually find, oh no, like I have to go look in prod and see that like that request didn't actually land the way I wanted it to. And I have a little time to adjust and maybe consider doing something completely different. So what happens is you actually end up delivering things faster and killing off bad ideas faster, or pivoting. So I think the bottom row is actually what we see happening at Reddit, We have a bunch of projects going on at any given time. We don't have a huge sunk cost at any given time. And so we are deciding not to move forward with something, and it's not a big deal because we haven't been working on it that long. Or we have these sort of like opportunistic things that come up while we're doing a project and go, oh, at this point, we finished a sprint. There's something that's much, much more valuable for us to do, and we can tie up whatever we have our lowest priority on and just put it down for a while. You can't do that when you're waterfalling. You are in it until you're done. The other nice thing about this is that if you are a team that celebrates successes, you have built up a whole bunch of success in the top sort of pattern, and it better show up. And it better be showing up and validated in prod. And if it's not, then you've like wasted a whole bunch of time. However, if you're doing this incremental approach, you have tiny little wins all the time. You've learned something almost every time. You've also learned maybe what you don't want to do. So you are much less likely to say, we're just going to follow through with this and see what happens in prod. You're more likely to go, maybe we should move on to something else. So you end up with a lot more stars, which are your big wins. That might be when you have cake. But you have a lot of small wins, too, and learnings along the way that you are skipping when you're not validating things as you go. So you probably all heard that before, so I'm going to kind of move on from this one. All right, so enough about Agile. There are lots of reasons that people want to change. And there are plenty of reasons why you don't. If you're thinking about doing something like a migration, start with the why, but make sure you cover the why not. Do the adversarial thought exercise on what happens if you just don't do this work. This is actually look at the costs and benefits from all angles, not just the ones for your own team. If you've got a lot of swirling going on about the benefits of a project, make sure you have the right people around you. This is actually a mistake I see a lot. Engineers talking to other engineers, they usually reach consensus on what a good approach is, or a good enough approach is, really fast. Where they struggle is where they have not thought it out for the other types of stakeholders around them, or they have, but they haven't pitched it right. They have pitched the engineering reasons to their non-engineering stakeholders instead of converting those reasons or finding out the reasons that might resonate more with those stakeholders. So, I think that there shouldn't be so many frustrated engineers around always talking about why they're not getting their approaches through if all the other engineers are actually agreeing with them. So it must be something else. All right, why am I not able to move on? Okay, so one of the things you have to think about when you're trying to pitch to other stakeholders is what is their value prop? And there are a lot of value props that aren't immediately obvious when you are thinking about the migration from how it's going to affect your engineering team. A good example just to get this started is you might want something but because of the maintainability, you're struggling against your architecture and you're fighting your code base. That translates to your product managers wanting to move faster and getting a feature out faster. So if you explain it that way, then it's not really about that you refactored from A to B and what tech you're using to do it. It's about how much easier your refinement meetings are going to go. Those types of things. So we're just going to go over a couple of the facets of things to think about and some of the stakeholders you might not even consider who could be allies when you're trying to make your case. So to be competitive, you always want to be progressing. Some of your leaders and coworkers will respond really differently to different incentives, so you need to get to know them. Most companies these days really want to build a lasting feature or product that's going to live forever. So they're always looking for growth opportunities and how they're going to innovate more and how they're going to be competitive. And nobody wants to be left behind, or lose their edge. So what they want to do is they want to have all these different opportunities in front of them so they can choose the best at a given time. You can tap into that desire to remain competitive. Maybe you're in a really aggressive hiring phase. It's a lot easier to hire when you're using a newer tech stack. It's just the way it is. So if you want to get top talent, you probably don't want to be spinning up saying you're going to come work on legacy. It's as easy as that for certain, like that'll get you your recruiting partners. That will probably get you some of your executive leadership. You can tap into the fear on this, but that is like a double-edged sword of like, we're gonna be left behind, we're gonna be left behind. That doesn't go so well usually, but with some people it does. This is also actually true of people. So people want to be working on those better stacks. They want to be working on the newer stuff. That also just helps you know and pick where your like next path is. If you are not looking at all into the future, you're probably gonna miss some opportunities. To stay relevant and stable, stay up to date. There's a whole different set of stakeholders that are interested in de-risking and keeping the lights on. So problematic and insecure apps and frameworks, old tools that are no longer supported. Your security team, your AppSec folks, your IT folks care a lot about that. So you can often find allies in those sorts of areas for like when you see something is sort of lagging behind. Like, a good example of this is like, I used to be really frustrated about Google Play and how it would like nudge us forward and we'd end up having to react to things. But they've gotten a lot better about giving a lot of heads up in advance so that you can plan those things in. And so you can actually use those sorts of opportunities to say, we need to continue to be able to ship through the Play Store. We need to actually start prioritizing some of these things, or we're gonna be in reaction mode when this happen. And I know plenty of people are still in reaction mode when some of those things happen. Let's see. All right. Oh, and the last thing about reaction mode is just, if you're finding yourself in that place a lot on your projects and never get to the really important ones, make sure that when you're finishing your reactive project, the last exit criteria is how this never happens again. So if we have to go through a surprise, the last thing we do in that is say, well, we know this is gonna happen again, like next year, at approximately this time. And we just throw something into our roadmap to say, don't forget this is gonna happen again. That helps us never have that same problem twice. To develop efficiently, invest in strategic updates. So it's a good idea to every once in a while sit down with your team and talk about where is the industry gonna be in 5 years? Your business is trying to get you to write like 18-month, 3-year, 5-year plans. You should bring up as an engineering stakeholder that you probably aren't gonna be doing things this same way then, or you sure hope you're not going to be. And what is the plan to get to this new place? And it's fine not to have all the answers, you shouldn't, but you should at least be making at least some space in your roadmaps for these things. And that is kind of your job to like come in and give that advice to your non-engineering stakeholders. So you might have a lot of last mile problems. Reddit certainly does, and we've like tried to work through and kill off some of those lately. But it's actually really important not to get comfortable in this like interim place where you think you're almost done. I think with Android, you see this a lot with like, we can just keep our Java around. That's not such a big deal. And some of those other sorts of patterns. The problem with that is that it's really hard to talk about those things over time. You're talking about 2 different stacks, 2 different programs, 2 different migrations even. And you don't get to fully take advantage of why you started those migrations in the first place until you finish them. There's a lot of next level benefits to being on one thing. And you want to get there such that when the next thing comes out, you don't have 3. Legacy, where you're currently on, and what you want to go to next. So you have to figure out how to have a window of rolling stuff that you're doing. Another area here is just like letting go of old tech to make space for the new. It's the same thing with incidents. If you have to think about whether you're looking at your old infrastructure or your new infrastructure in order to debug a problem, you have twice as many runbooks. There's all sorts of issues there that end up being costs. All right, where are we at? Okay. To keep growing, you need to search for new ways to reach your users. This one is actually a really fun one. Not all migrations and stuff end up being greenfield efforts. Sometimes you hear about some cool new thing, maybe that's come out in Android 15, and you just want to go do it. There are things like you want new surfaces, widgets, wearables, tablets, foldables, TV, auto, I guess some people auto. And then there are Android features like compose, predictive back, all that kind of stuff. So these can actually be more fun pitching opportunities, but they usually have the most questionable value up front until you've validated them in your particular ecosystem. So for this reason at Reddit, we often do little stealth projects during our hackathons called Snooze Weeks to kind of build confidence and support for those ideas and try them out. Because we need to know whether they're gonna work for Reddit. So they might be larger risk changes to go whole hog on, but you can kind of get an end-to-end answer for yourself. And maybe you've heard in previous talks how we've even done this with our own big migrations. So for example, we might ship an entire feature in our new tech stack before we will ever commit to doing that for everybody else. We want to know how to do that all the way from startup to sunsetting of that feature. Okay, to stay nimble, you want to be willing to let things go. This is probably the hardest one that we have at Reddit. We don't like to let go of any of the features we've introduced to our users. Somebody somewhere is using it. I wish it was easier to do this, but we definitely, this is an area that we continue to work on. However, it's also really hard to pitch those projects because you are removing something and it's hard to say what the value is up front, but usually there's a ton of value in there. We have whole Slack channels devoted to celebrating the removal of legacy stuff. You often get cost benefits, you get tremendous maintenance benefits. Your apps get smaller, they get lighter, they get easier to maintain. If you have rampant growth in your apps and no removals, it will eventually just affect everything. I once heard of a company that rewrote all of their features on a rotation with interns, simply to keep things from getting bit rotty. And while I think that wouldn't work for us, and it's not particularly scalable, I do think about that when we end up with a module or a feature that is clearly not well maintained and is starting to everyone's afraid to touch it. And so at that point in time, we start kind of pitching those smaller projects to go, we know we're gonna end up having a big one here eventually. We need to start actually poking it kind of like a home inspector looking for dry rot and go, well, we can refactor this away and tidy up over here and make the problem small enough such that when we are ready to pitch an actual project, we know what we're talking about. Okay, so if you've explored all the different ways that you could approach your stakeholders, you have to go talk to them. So you probably want to practice this within your own team, but really go talk to people who are outside of it. It's super easy for you to end up being in a kind of bubble where everyone agrees with you. So you have to go looking for the people who disagree, the ones that are skeptical. You don't have to convince them. You need to find out from them what they need to be convinced with. If you have people who can't be convinced, there's not much you can do about it. But usually they have something that, if you talk to them enough, they're like, I'm worried about this. And then you make sure that that's part of your validation strategy of, oh, we have to make sure that we cover that problem. It can be really helpful to know whether or not you're going to be able to do gradual incremental wins along the way, like your build times get subtly better over time, or there's only a payout at the end. The payout at the end projects are the hardest to pitch. So you should look for the incremental wins, even if that wasn't your original plan. On the flip side, if someone pitches something to you and you hate the idea, which I also hear a lot about sometimes, you should express your concerns and what would change your mind, but also help them come up with the quickest way to do a project that would fail fast. Not in a mean way, but if you can fail fast and prove out that that wasn't gonna work, great. But you also might be wrong. So that actually helps you debias yourself. And that's something that I learned only when I went into management, that just because it went one way for me the couple times I tried to do it, that didn't make me an expert. There's timing, there's a dice roll involved there sometimes. There's all sorts of reasons why you might have a different outcome on trying something than me. And a good example of that for us was like introducing trunk-based development patterns. The first 15 times it was tried, it did not fly. But then we just did it on the 16th try, and everyone was ready for it, and it went very, very smoothly, and it was done. And so people were frustrated, like, why didn't it work the first time? It's like, well, you warmed them up. Like, so it's not, you never know who's gonna win. All right. So here's a good example. Maybe you have a design system, and maybe you don't yet. When we first introduced one, the first few design systems at Reddit didn't go very well, okay? They didn't deliver the value that they were hoping. And when we got to this latest iteration, which has been successful, we had to basically pitch it a couple of different times. Every time there was a rebranding opportunity, people were like, I wish we had a design system. We're like, yeah, we wish we did too. And so if you do that enough, and the rebranding has become so expensive, you can start saying stuff like, I know we're gonna rebrand again probably in about 18 months. That seems about how often we do it. So maybe we should actually do this work now so that the next one is super easy. So that's how we got most of the stakeholders who were most core to that particular effort on board. Design really wanted certain things. They wanted more consistency, they wanted more control over what was in production, they wanted users to see the same thing in different places. Marketing wanted rebranding to be really easy and not like engineering telling them it was gonna take months and months. Feature teams didn't want to be reinventing the wheel all the time, they wanted to focus on their feature. So notice that I'm not saying the same value prop to each one of those places. They all had something different that they wanted, and the team had to make sure they were satisfying all of them. What's interesting about this is that there were actually a whole bunch of other benefits that engineering really wanted. Like, yeah, we wanted design alignment, but we also wanted to dabble in KMP, which we were just starting to hear about. We wanted to ease our compose adoption, and compose and design systems go really well together. Turns out that these are the same patterns you need to solve I-18N internationalization problems together, and accessibility problems together, and also some testing problems together. But we didn't start with that, and we didn't put that all on the project. It was more like, look at all these side effects we got out of this after the fact. Okay. I think the most important thing here is just keep trying. Fatalism is actually really dangerous. I spend a lot of my time talking to my engineering partners about not giving up on their good ideas, just looking for the right time for them to be ready to be acted on. And another aspect of that is finding good starting partners, and having shovel-ready work for that moment where the stars and the little things came up on Agile, where you're like, what's the most important thing we could be doing right now? Is it the low priority product decisions that we have next that we've turned out not needing for our MVP? Or is it the high priority engineering project that is just sitting there ready to go? So you kind of have to have those shovel ready and look for those opportunities where you're doing an apples to apples comparison of business value, which means you probably have to set up epics in Jira. All right, finding partners. I want to go a little faster. So some of the most important things about your partners are don't use the same ones every time. I think engineering teams get really comfortable with certain other engineering teams that they know are going to adopt the new thing really fast. Don't burn those teams out. They can't always be the one that's validating your stuff. Try and move around and find the right value prop for different teams so that you're delivering to different stakeholders. I'm not a fan of mandates, and anyone who's being voluntold to work with me on a project, I know that's going to be harder on them, and it's going to be more likely on our project to go slower and be more difficult. So I'm looking for willing participants who actually have resources, and not excited people who have no resources and people who have been dragged in. Anything else on here? Those people are going to become the evangelists for the second part of a project, which is important here. So I kind of bucket people. I'm gonna use an Android Studio example here. We want our 100 Android engineers to move from an old version of Android Studio to a new one. The moment a new version of Android Studio comes out, even like a canary, we have a certain set of our users who are like, I want it right now. And we'll say, okay, well, you guys go off and go try it out. Tell us how it goes. Because we don't want to have everyone move over at once if there are problems with it. So we have some people who will rush ahead and try them out and then bring feedback back. We take that feedback, we make sure that a couple of things on the platform side are going well. Then we have the mid adopters, and they're always interested in being on the newer stuff, but they don't want to run into any real problems. They might have really critical deadlines or something like that, and so they're a little risk averse. And so they're watching the weird rabbit dude. They're watching them to know, did they just completely crash and burn, or are they actually still using it a couple days later? And maybe they will too. So they'll jump in after they know that the water is warm. Then you have the late adopters. They want to make sure everything looks great. They don't want to run into a single build problem. They don't want to run into a sync problem, nothing. And so they are watching the first two groups to know that there's a really good value for them and really low risk. And then if you have anyone at the end, and you almost always have a small group that will only update when they are forced, that's when you might need a mandate. But you try and do this at the end when all the problems have been ironed out, and you really are giving everyone a much better experience than what they started with. And if you aren't, why did you do it in the first place, right? All right, tracking progress. I really like this part. Something I see a lot of people do is track progress from the beginning to the end, only on the thing they want to see, okay? I want to see us adopt Compose. We have no Compose, we have a little bit of Compose, lots of Compose. You also kind of want to be watching the things you don't want to see. So how much not Compose do we still have? Is that growing? Do we still have Java files being added to our code base at the same time we're trying to move to Kotlin? Why is that happening? So you really need to see both of those things, ideally together, to get a good picture of whether or not your project is on track. And I am really suspicious of any project that just shows the one graph. I'm like, show me the other one. If the two are going up at the same time, there's half the project is you're adding to the pile while you're moving stuff from the pile. The other thing to look for are side effects, the ones you kind of expect, and maybe the ones you weren't expecting. And that can require some data science. So what do I want to say here? Another anti-pattern here on your projects is just measuring project status, how much your code base has been modularized, versus the value, which is how are your builds improving? How are your individual feature teams feeling about working in these more autonomous spaces? So you kind of want to measure both, but maybe not on the same graph. I'm a big fan of proxy metrics. What do I mean by this? I see us often get mired in trying to measure the exact thing we want and it being really, really difficult. Whereas usually you can just squint at a problem and go, I know we're going in the right direction, or not. And so if that's a lot cheaper to measure, I am really comfortable measuring it that way until the directionality doesn't work. So for example, we didn't have to measure our Java to Kotlin on file count, line count type of ways, but it was super easy, and we knew when it was done, and I didn't really need anything else other than that, as long as I could see the graph. But that isn't the value of it, it's just a really easy way. Okay, and also it's a really easy way for everyone else to understand, even if they're not engineers. There's a benefit to that. Okay, so this is the world's okayest adoption graph of our feature module adoption. Look, it went really well. It's just flawless. But why did we decide to do this, and when are we done? Can you tell by looking at this, I guess, if you run out of modules, but we're always adding them. So it's okay. The good stuff that we wanted to see was going up, but we don't really get the full picture. Here's another graph. This one is what we were trying to get rid of, our legacy. For a while, they were like, I mean, this is a very different shape. It's a very different timeline. We know when we're done. That's the cake. We also saw that we started actually going down naturally when we introduced the new thing. But then we kind of stalled, and there were a whole bunch of things that were left, that's our last mile right there with the little magnifying glass. We had to look into what was going on there. So this is what I like to see in a better graph. You can see a whole bunch of stuff. First of all, we introduced a new thing, and it did have pretty natural adoption. We also looked into the old thing to see how are we going to get rid of it. And we tried to keep those projects together, but loosely coupled. Towards the end, we saw that we had some legacy code that no one was going to fix, so we had to actually do a tactical project to make it go away. So we did. And then we know that we only have the new stuff we want, the old stuff is gone, and we know when to celebrate. Here's some other, so we're using SourceGraph here, and I love SourceGraph. Our team uses it for a whole bunch of stuff. On the left, the signature X is when your new stuff is overtaking your old stuff, and that's kind of a critical point where you're like, hey, we're getting somewhere. It looks different based on different things. We've got modularization, we've got an Apollo GraphQL, adoption, all sorts of stuff. We also look for trends, so changes means something's going on. That's often a time where the feature flag count one, we did hackathons where we burned down all the dead experiments in our code base. That's what those little down ones were. They were not making a difference. They would just immediately have more experiments in our code base. So we know we needed to have a bigger project, a bigger effort there. The last one is sometimes when you see a trend, which is sort of you can actually look at both of these second columns for this. That's when platform teams can consider CI checks, adding friction, making it harder to do the thing you don't want to see. So we don't do that up front necessarily, although we sometimes do. We definitely start adding things towards the second half of a project to be like, no, you cannot commit code that looks like this anymore. Please use this other method. Sometimes that requires us to have really high-touch projects. So this is our DI migration. You see that the start of it is really strong. We had a staff engineer basically getting it all set up, getting a few early adopters going. It went well. We saw it sort of stagnate after the first part, and we did a developer survey. And developer said, Anvil and Dagger is still hard. I'm like, it's always going to be hard, but it's still too hard. So what did we do? We built out a wiki around how to do it all. We introduced some nice little scripts, and we started a high-touch Slack channel where anyone who was doing a migration would have all the support they needed from the team. Then we got that whole second natural progression, and that went on for quite some time with people regularly making improvements. But then it sort of stagnated again, and so at the end we're like, oh, do we have any opportunities for plugins? And if you saw Drew Hebner's talk at the last droidcon in New York, he was talking about some of this. We introduced some plugins to make it even easier to move. So we didn't do those things all up front. We didn't have a big project where we said, we are going to make plugins. We're going to make all this documentation. We're going to do this. We did this just in time because we looked into what people needed then, and then we did it, which made the project much leaner up front, much easier, more palatable, and we actually solved the right problem instead of anticipating what we thought the problems were going to be, which actually made the project a lot leaner. And then, at the very end, we have a big hackathon to kill off the last little bit of it, and we eat cake. And I'm going to move on to one last thing, and then we're done. Back one. So, when it comes to looking for project value, think broad. I used to only think that you needed to collect cold, hard quantitative data, you should also look at the qualitative data. It actually matters a lot, especially when you can't measure well. Usually your developers or your users are telling you things that matter. Sometimes measuring value is really, really hard. So you need to try, that's an area of innovation for your team, and you should just look at new ways to look at the problem and how you've solved it. And it's really important after your projects to really scrutinize whether you did what you said you were gonna do. And if you didn't, figure out how to do it better next time. If you thought it was gonna be super easy, which almost everyone does up front, and then it wasn't, look at why it wasn't. What were the parts that you were a little bit wishy-washy on? And make those better the next time. And that's how your estimations get better. No one's good at estimating, but you get less bad at it. And that will also help you make your next projects and estimations and risk assessments better. I have one funny example to end with. You gotta look for the side effects. So you think you're gonna do something great. We thought we were fixing the top legacy crash in our app. We did. And once we mitigated it, we got a huge crash improvement out of it. The ironic side effect, though, that we noticed like a month later was that in incidents, our app was like not recovering as well when we were changing experiments. And the reason was because we were getting a natural experiment refresh out of that particular crash. So we couldn't actually take action on certain startup things fast enough because then we had to actually update our experiment framework to fix that. So we caused another problem by fixing one that was obvious. Look for those sorts of things because they do exist and they're also really fun to talk about. All right. Well, thank you. I don't think we have time for AMA at this point, so that's that.